The cold Pacific wind cut through the dunes at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, sharp enough to sting the eyes. Salt haze drifted low over the beach, and somewhere downrange steel targets rang out with a dull clang that carried through the dark. Under the red headlamp glow, faces looked hollow and serious, like the night itself demanded discipline. Even the surf sounded like a warning. Lieutenant Megan Hart moved with a med bag slung tight and combat lifesaver gear pressed against her ribs so the operators could stay lighter and faster. She was a United States Navy Nurse Corps lieutenant, an 03 trauma-registered nurse attached as a medical evaluator for a Navy Special Warfare casualty lane, not a shooter on the roster. To them, she was support. The person who checked tourniquets and graded march steps, while the real work happened up front in the surf zone. A senior SEAL looked her over and muttered she was just a nurse and should stay in her lane. Megan did not argue. She just worked. Her hands found a tourniquet strap and tightened it once. Calm and exact. As if she could cinch chaos into something survivable for everyone. The team began to move. Quiet under night vision discipline. Boots careful on wet sand. Rifles kept low and controlled. Then, the PRC-152 crackled and clipped into broken syllables. Contact left. Then man down. And in that instant, everyone felt completely that it was no longer just training. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado looked calm from the road. But inside the training lanes, it ran like a machine. Present-day workups brought Navy Special Warfare and United States Marine Corps elements together for long cycles that mixed live fire movement with strict range control and safety oversight. Steel targets sat in salt air, and every run had cadre watching angles, backstops, and muzzle discipline. The goal was simple: build deployment readiness until it felt automatic. And tonight the beach would test every assumption hard. Some lanes were built around casualties, because every team had to prove they could treat a wounded teammate under stress. Lieutenant Megan Hart was there for that piece. A United States Navy Nurse Corps lieutenant. An 03 trauma-registered nurse, assigned as the medical evaluator and advisor. Her job was to grade march care, watch for safety gaps, and keep the trauma lane honest. She was not there as an operator, and she never acted like she was. The platoon still treated her like she belonged on the edges. They used mom when they had to, but most of the time they spoke around her as if she was a clipboard with boots. Someone handed her extra combat lifesaver supplies, tourniquets, and chest seals, then pointed her toward the mannequins and told her to focus on scoring, while they checked optics, adjusted slings, and rehearsed sectors. She became the person who carried weight so they could feel fast for a moment. The hierarchy gave their assumptions a uniform to hide behind. The platoon officer in charge was Lieutenant Jason Keller, careful in briefings and clear about the plan for the night coastal infiltration and exfiltration package. Senior Chief Daniel Price served as the leading petty officer, the steady anchor who tracked details, enforced standards, and kept the platoon moving as one. Chief Ethan Cole was the senior operator in the stack. Sharp, experienced, and openly dismissive. The kind of man who could make a whole team nod with one look. Around them, Marine instructors and range staff watched like referees, not participants, checking that every drill stayed inside the lines. A safety officer would halt a run if a muzzle wandered or a lane went unsafe. And everyone knew it. That knowledge made the operators confident. Sometimes too confident, because it suggested the night could not truly surprise them. Megan noticed that confidence the way she noticed a pulse. Present and rising, even when nobody else admitted it could become a problem quickly. Megan had heard that tone before. In other places and other wars. She had done multiple combat medical rotations. Working trauma, cases where seconds mattered and voices got small on purpose. Under pressure, she did not get loud. She got precise. And the calm was not a personality trait so much as a survival skill. She watched hands, breathing, and bleeding. Because that was how people stayed alive. There was another skill she never mentioned, even though it lived in her body like reflex. Back home, she had been a nationally ranked precision rifle competitor. The kind who could call a miss before a spotter spoke and still stay steady. Years earlier, she had let that show during a training event. And the backlash had been immediate and petty. The nurse outshot the operators became a joke. Then a grievance. And she learned to lock that part of herself away. On this beach, the red headlamp glow felt like judgment. Lighting, rank, and ego in the same harsh wash. Tourniquet straps lay coiled in her pouch. Reminders that control was sometimes just a tight loop pulled at the right moment. Salt spray gathered on lenses and optics, blurring the world in a way that matched the platoon's bias about her place. Megan did not fight it with speeches. She just kept preparing, because she knew the night would eventually demand proof. The lane started the way it always did, with disciplined whispers and almost no light. Just the faint red headlamp glow, kept low and shielded. Most faces were hidden behind night vision, and the beach turned into a narrow tunnel of sand, surf, and quiet breathing. Range control and safety cadre stayed in the background, close enough to stop a run if something went unsafe, but far enough to let the platoon work. Lieutenant Jason Keller led the movement with a steady pace, and Senior Chief Daniel Price floated behind the line, counting bodies and watching angles. Chief Ethan Cole stayed near the front, confident and sharp, acting like nothing could touch them inside a controlled exercise. Lieutenant Megan Hart trailed with her medbag and extra combat lifesaver supplies, ready to grade March care if the lane produced another training casualty. They were only a few minutes into the coastal movement when something felt wrong. Not dramatic, just off by a fraction. A crack echoed from the left. Too hard and too clean for a blank. And the sound did not match the expected timing from the lane staff. For a beat, everyone froze. And then the reality settled in. This was either an unknown, armed intruder near the edge of the training area, or an unauthorized live round event. And it was close. The first call came fast and low. Contact left. And the whole platoon reacted in the same breath. They got small, dropped into what cover the dunes offered, and tried to make the beach stop being flat. Another voice pushed for sectors, and the line compressed into a shallow draw that suddenly felt like a trap. The angle bad and the skyline too exposed. A kill zone feel without anyone saying the words. The point man took the hit first and went down hard, turning from a moving silhouette into a shape that did not rise. Lieutenant Keller shifted toward him and caught a sting of impact or blast effect. Nothing that dropped him, but enough to punch the air from his lungs and steal a second of clean command. Senior Chief Price filled the gap immediately, snapping the platoon back into structure and restoring sectors and fires with the steady urgency of someone who had done it before. Radio traffic on the PRC 152 started to stack and smear together, not failing, just degrading, as bodies pressed into low ground and stress tightened every throat. Words arrived, clipped and half swallowed. Bearings and short warnings. Then a burst of static that made the beach feel even smaller. It sounded like order trying to survive inside chaos. And it was working only barely. Lieutenant Megan Hart moved the moment the point man dropped, dragging him by the kit into what cover she could find and using her body to shield his head from sand and stray grit. She started march without fanfare, going straight to massive hemorrhage control and then checking that he could still move air. Her hands calm, even as the night snapped around them. Chief Ethan Cole pushed his voice toward her again, telling her to stay in her lane. But Megan barely heard him, because her focus was already split between the casualty and the line of fire. As she cinched the tourniquet tight and sealed what needed sealing, She lifted her eyes and tracked the pattern of impacts along the sand. This was not random shooting. It was disciplined fire placed to control movement, to keep the platoon pinned and predictable. Megan realized the wound in front of her was only the first problem, and the real threat was the incoming fire that owned the beach. Lieutenant Megan Hart kept low behind the dune and finished what her hands had started. She slid a cat tourniquet higher and cinched it until the bleeding stopped. Then noted the time in her head because she would have to report it later. The sand was cold and wet, and she could feel the casualty shivering even through gear. She pulled an insulating layer from her kit and tucked it around the torso to slow heat loss. She moved to the chest next, quick and careful, and wiped away grit so the seal would stick. A vented chest seal went over the wound. Then her fingers checked for rise and fall as the surf boomed in the dark. She did not talk much, but her voice stayed steady when she told him to keep breathing and stay with her. The point was not comfort. It was function. One more minute bought at a time. Above them, the incoming shots kept snapping into the sand with a pattern that did not feel random. Whoever was firing was not spraying. They were controlling the draw, pinning heads down and freezing movement. Megan felt a tight anger flare, not at the shooter, but at the helpless geometry of it. In her mind, this was still medicine, because the next casualty would be created by that fire unless someone changed the problem. She looked down the line and saw Lieutenant Jason Keller trying to speak through pain and noise, while Senior Chief Daniel Price pulled the platoon back into sectors. Chief Ethan Cole was up, crouched and scanning, but the angle was wrong and the shooter had the advantage. Megan knew she was not there to be an operator, and she did not want anyone else's job. She just wanted the platoon to have room to move a wounded man and stop the bleeding from multiplying. AMK-18, Mod 1 lay near the casualty, its sling twisted, where someone had gone down and let it fall. Megan took it the way she took any tool, with respect and control, keeping the muzzle away from teammates. She did a quick press check without drama, confirmed the magazine was seated, and set the selector to semi. Then she settled into a stable prone, using her med bag as a rest, letting the sand absorb the tremor in her shoulders. The night air carried salt and crosswind, and she let it touch her cheek for a second like a gauge. Low scrub, near the berm, bent in a steady direction, and she watched it the way she watched a monitor back in a trauma bay. Through her optic, she could see just enough contrast to pick a shape near the higher ground, a hint of movement against darker shadows. She breathed out and held the stillness that comes right before a decision. Her first shot was not loud to her ears. It was sharp and contained, like a door closing. She did not chase noise. She placed each round where it would matter, breaking the rhythm of the intruder's fire. The goal was suppression and disruption, not a cinematic win, and she stayed disciplined when the temptation to hurry showed up. Between shots, she kept her cheek welded and her mind calm, as if calm itself was a weapon. The effect showed up fast in the platoon's posture. Heads lifted a fraction, bodies shifted, and the line stopped feeling trapped for the first time in a minute. Chief Cole went quiet, then started watching where she was aiming instead of watching her. Respect in that world did not arrive as applause. It arrived as silence and faster teamwork. Megan reached for the PRC 152 and keyed it close to her mouth so her voice would carry without shouting. She sent a clean salute report, size and activity, then location by bearing and rough grid, then a quick description of the shooter and rifle. She warned it was danger close and kept it short, so Senior Chief Daniel Price could read it back and pass it to range control and base security. The reply was clipped, but it told her someone else was moving to help. Even while she held the rifle, she never stopped being a nurse. She glanced down after every short string, checking that the tourniquet stayed tight and that breathing stayed possible. Her hand pressed the casualty's shoulder once, firm and steady. A reminder that he was still there and still in the fight for life. Then her eyes returned to the threat. Because protecting his airway and protecting his space had become the same thing. Senior Chief Price used the opening to re-establish sectors and prepare a move. And the platoon began to breathe as one unit again. Lieutenant Keller's voice steadied, and the chain of command snapped back into place. Even if it was held together by grit and pain, Chief Cole slid closer, taking a position that covered her flank without being asked. In the red glow and the salt haze, he finally spoke to her like she had always deserved, calling her lieutenant and asking what she needed right then. Chief Ethan Cole shifted closer to Lieutenant Megan Hart without asking permission, like his instincts finally caught up to the reality in front of him. A few minutes earlier, he had written her off as just a nurse. But now her controlled fire was the only thing keeping the threat from owning their position. He angled his body to shield her firing lane, watching her flank and the higher ground at the same time. Respect did not arrive as kindness. It arrived as protection. Senior Chief Daniel Price tightened the platoon back into structure, and the beach stopped feeling like a scattered group of silhouettes. He pushed sectors out again and checked that everyone had a job. Then he nodded toward Cole and Megan as if to say, "Keep that lane alive." Lieutenant Jason Keller stayed present as the officer in charge. But the sting of his hit made his voice come in bursts. Even so, his intent was clear. Stabilize, move the wounded, and hold until security contained the breach. Cole started talking in the short, functional language teams use when time is running out. He called covering as Megan shifted her knees and dragged her med bag a few feet to a better angle. Then he called moving when he slid to the next piece of cover. She answered with action, not words. Settling back into prone and placing 2 deliberate shots where the threat had been flashing. When she was set, Cole adjusted his own position to keep her lane clean. Megan did not look up to see who was impressed. Between shots, she kept her left hand on the casualty, checking that the tourniquet stayed tight and that breathing stayed possible behind the chest seal. She tucked the insulating layer in tighter, because shock and heat loss kill quietly even when bullets are loud. Her mind tracked the same priorities it always did. Stop the bleeding. Keep the air moving. Buy time. The radio traffic sharpened as base security and range control got pulled into the same problem. On the PRC 152, voices became clearer and more focused, with quick confirmations and location checks that told Megan help was moving far down the beach. Distant lights appeared in a slow sweep, then grew brighter as vehicles approached the perimeter access points. It was not a cavalry charge. It was a disciplined response, measured and real. Megan felt the old memory try to crawl up her spine, the one that always came with blood and shouting and the split second where someone did not make it for a breath. Her chest tightened, and she tasted the same helplessness she carried from past rotations. Then she forced her focus back to procedure, like grabbing a handrail in rough surf. She counted breathing, checked bleeding, and returned her eye to the threat without letting the past steal time. Chief Ethan Cole kept doing what needed doing, even if it meant swallowing his pride, one mouthful at a time. He watched her muzzle discipline, her selector discipline, and the steady pace of her shots, and he stopped treating her like an outsider. When she needed to shift, he made space, and when she needed to shoot, he gave her quiet cover. The platoon followed that lead, not because Cole said so, but because the results were undeniable. Senior Chief Price used the window Megan created to pull the platoon out of the worst angle and into better cover. He coordinated with Lieutenant Keller in short exchanges, then pushed the move with calm authority, keeping sectors intact as bodies relocated. The casualty moved too, dragged in careful bursts that matched the covering and moving cadence. Megan stayed low and steady, checking the casualty each time they stopped, then putting rounds on the threat only when it mattered. By the time base security closed in, the immediate danger had been pushed back and contained, more by discipline than drama. The platoon finally had freedom of movement, and the beach stopped feeling like it was closing in on them. Megan did not celebrate. She just kept working, because her job was still the same: keep them alive. And in the dim red glow, the justice of the moment landed quietly. The man who mocked her was now the one making sure she could do what saved them. The debrief room was lit in red, the kind of light that makes everything look flat and tired. Wet gear sat in piles by the wall, and the air smelled like salt, sweat, and rubber gloves. Nobody talked much, because everyone could still hear the surf and the crack of live rounds in their head. The silence felt earned, not awkward. Lieutenant Jason Keller stood at the front with a towel around his neck and a bruise blooming under his collar. He did not raise his voice or decorate the story. He just walked through the sequence like an officer who knows details keep people alive. He noted what worked, what failed, and what had to change before the next run. Then he let the room hold one sentence. And he said plainly that if Lieutenant Megan Hart does not shoot tonight, they do not come home. It landed harder than any yelling would have. Head stayed down. Hands stayed still. And the room absorbed it the way sand absorbs blood. Quietly and completely. In that culture, respect is not a feeling. It is a result. You earn it with performance when things go bad. Not with rank, not with volume, not with swagger. Chief Ethan Cole pushed himself upright like he was carrying weight that had nothing to do with his kit. He faced Megan and kept his words short, because long apologies can sound like excuses. He addressed her correctly, calling her Lieutenant and Mom. And he said he was wrong. He did not ask for forgiveness. He just owned it and sat back down. Megan did not smile or take a victory lap. And that made her authority feel even more real. She kept her voice even and said she did what she did to keep people breathing and moving. Nothing more. She added that ugly possibilities are still possibilities, and planning for them is part of the job. The point was not to shame anyone. It was to make sure the next time the platoon had options sooner. When the room finally loosened, Megan set her med bag on the table like she was setting down the whole night. A tourniquet strap hung from the side, still gritty with sand, still ready to do its work again if it had to. The red light washed over it. And for the first time, nobody looked at it like it belonged to someone on the sidelines. They looked at it like a tool that had brought them home. What stuck with that platoon was not the adrenaline or the noise. It was the quiet lesson that came after. In high-stakes places, ego can get people hurt because it makes you underestimate the person standing next to you. Competence does the opposite. It gives you options. When options are running out, humility keeps those options open, because it lets you accept help from the most unexpected hands. Lieutenant Megan Hart did not turn into someone else that night, and she did not chase a new identity. She stayed a nurse, the kind who treats chaos like a problem you can work through one step at a time. She used calm procedures, clear communication, and controlled rifle fire, the same way she used pressure and bandages, as tools to preserve life. She did not need applause. She needed the platoon to keep breathing and moving. That is why the little details matter when you think back on it. The red headlamp glow was judgment and hierarchy, lighting up who people thought mattered before the night proved anything. The tourniquet strap was control. A simple loop tightened at the right moment to make survival possible again. Salt on optics was bias. The film that clouds vision until reality wipes it clean, with results nobody can deny. It is easy to celebrate the loudest person in the room, or the most confident voice on the radio. It is harder, and more important, to respect the people whose work does not look heroic until the moment it saves you. Support roles like medical personnel carry weight most people never notice. And they do it without needing a spotlight. Value is not decided by swagger. It is decided by what someone does when everything goes sideways. In the end, the platoon learned her name, and that alone meant something. But the bigger change was quieter than that. They learned how to see people clearly, even when salt and ego try to blur the picture. And that is the kind of lesson that can follow you into every hard day after.